security is being undermined at alarming levels, from challenges around contested boundaries and navigation routes that do not conform to international law, to the depletion of natural resources, including illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, to armed attacks and crimes at sea, such as piracy, robbery, and terrorist acts, as well as use of limpet mines and drones. In fact, despite an overall decrease in the volume of maritime traffic due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the first half of 2020 saw a nearly 20% increase in reported acts of piracy and armed robbery against ships worldwide over the previous year. In Asia, such incidents nearly doubled. West Africa, the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, and the South China Sea were most affected by piracy and armed robbery against ships. The unprecedented levels of insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea and recently in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea are particularly concerning. Maritime insecurity is also compounding the terrorist threat emerging from the Sahel. Mr. President, these growing and interlinked threats call for a truly global and integrated response, a response that addresses these challenges directly, as well as their root causes, including poverty, a lack of alternative livelihoods, insecurity, and weak governance structures, and a response that brings together everyone with a stake in our maritime spaces, from governments and regional groups to shipping companies and the fishing and extraction industry, to those charged with keeping our maritime spaces secure from threats like piracy, robberies, terrorism, and transnational crime, including drug trafficking and the smuggling of migrants, and always to the people living in coastal communities who count on the ocean for their livelihoods and well-being. The good news is that we already have an international legal regime for maritime security underpinned by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The convention and related instruments strike a careful balance between state sovereign rights, jurisdiction, and freedoms, and their duties and obligations. But this framework is only as strong as countries' commitment to full and effective implementation. We need to translate commitment into action. As the Secretary General has said repeatedly, all states must live up to their obligations, and they must resolve any differences in relation to maritime security in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. We welcome the concerted steps taken by the Security Council and member states so far to strengthen international and regional cooperation on maritime security, and to do so in accordance with all related instruments, including the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. We also support many regional initiatives that are gathering partners around maritime security across the globe, aimed at fighting piracy off the coast of Somalia, ending armed robbery against ships in Asia, tackling the growing insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea and the Persian Gulf, and strengthening security in the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. The Secretary General, special representatives, and envoys are working shoulder to shoulder with their national, regional, and international counterparts to end maritime crime and piracy and peacefully settle competing claims. By lending your voice and support to these initiatives, this Council can draw increased attention to these efforts and trigger action. Finally, our global response must include working with those people most affected by maritime security challenges. Across the United Nations family, we are working with impoverished coastal communities to develop new opportunities for decent and sustainable work through technical assistance and capacity building. We need to reduce the likelihood that desperate people turn to crime and other activities that threaten maritime security and degrade our ocean environment. And we need to make sure that our oceans and seas can continue thriving and support humanity's economic, social, cultural, and environmental development for generations to come. Mr. President, throughout our work, We need to ensure that our response recognizes the clear link between security and sustainability, for without security, the sustainable and responsible development of the oceans and its resources is impossible. We cannot afford to squander the future of this wondrous natural gift, nor the future of the billions of people who rely on it. Given the clear links between global security and our maritime spaces, we welcome efforts to further galvanize support for action. We look forward to working with this Council and with communities and partners like India to unlock the full potential of sustainable, peaceful, and secure oceans and seas for us all. Thank you.
On the World Maritime Day last year, the Secretary General highlighted the important role played by seafarers in ensuring the flow of global supply chains during the pandemic. I'm sure that our discussion on maritime security today will advance such ideas. I now give the floor to the Executive Director of the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Council, it's indeed an honor to have this opportunity to address the Security Council on maritime security. I'm grateful for the high-level attention and comprehensive approach that India is bringing to this urgent priority. I'm also thankful for the strong support shown for the UN Office on Drugs and Crime in the presidential statement on behalf of the Council. India has demonstrated its steadfast commitment to enhancing maritime security, including through the Indian Ocean Rim Association and the Bay of Bengal Initiative. With 80% of global trade carried by sea and major shipping routes along the Indian Ocean, such cooperative responses to maritime crime are essential. I also welcome the African Union's continued focus on this issue, including through the Lomé Charter. All countries, coastal and landlocked, rely on the security of the world's oceans. Freedom of navigation, confirmed by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, is recognized as a fundamental principle of international law. This time-honored freedom has come increasingly under threat. Piracy and armed robbery, terrorism, drug trafficking, and trafficking in nuclear materials and firearms, human trafficking and the smuggling of migrants, illegal activities in the fisheries sector, waste trafficking, and intentional and unlawful damage to the marine environment. All represent acute challenges to global efforts to maintain international peace and security and to keep the world's oceans accessible and safe for seafarers for shipping. Climate change and marine pollution are adversely affecting billions of people, including 9.4 million fishers and 2 million seafarers. Hardship will leave more people vulnerable to crime and exploitation. As commercial air travel decreased and land border controls increased in 2020 due to COVID-19, illicit drug trafficking on maritime and waterway routes accelerated in Europe, Latin America, North Africa, and Southeast Asia. According to UNODC's 2021 World Drug Report, record shipments of cocaine were seized in European ports during the pandemic. Preliminary data from 12 countries indicate that quantities seized in seaports were up 18% last year. As the 2020 Secretary General report on oceans and the law of the sea highlighted, oceans also serve as transit areas for some 99% of the world's internet traffic. During the COVID-19 crisis, usage increased by up to 50%. This network of submarine cables represents a critical vulnerability, with some smaller island states relying on a single cable connection. Piracy and armed robbery at sea continued to be a major threat during the pandemic. The lives of seafarers remain at risk, particularly in the Gulf of Guinea, where some 90% of kidnapping incidents have occurred. A new UNODC study has found that pirate operations in the Gulf of Guinea are becoming more sophisticated. Some 6 pirate groups, with 30 to 50 members each, have developed the capacity to conduct attacks in deeper waters, and they are mostly targeting international vessels to kidnap crew members for ransom. The overall combined income resulting from the attacks has been estimated at some $4 million per year. The economic impact, however, has been estimated to be in the range of $800 million. Now, the first half of 2020 has seen a 20% increase in incidents of piracy and armed robbery against ships compared with the same period in 2019. Security needs, changes in routes, additional fuel, increased insurance, and other costs are estimated in the billions of dollars, with an obvious negative impact on global trade. The need to tackle piracy and organized crime at sea has been increasingly recognized by the Council and by member states. UNODC has supported member states to address transnational challenges to maritime security for more than a decade. Our Global Maritime Crime Program began in 2009 with a budget of $300,000 to address the threat of Somali piracy. It has since then expanded into our largest program with a budget of over $230 million, providing capacity building and support for legal reform, simulated trials, maritime training centers, and more. This assistance is provided by some 170 personnel based in 26 member states who work in teams focusing on the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, expanding partnerships, and promoting holistic crime prevention responses. Allow me to elaborate on these 4 points. Firstly, we need more effective implementation of the international legal framework and Security Council resolutions promoting maritime security. This includes Security Council Resolution 2551, which gives UNODC a leading role in supporting states to disrupt trafficking of illicit and licit goods into and out of Somalia, and to curb the provision of components for improvised explosive devices intended for Al-Shabaab. The framework governing use of the oceans and their resources is further reinforced by the UN Convention Against Transnational Crime and its protocols addressing human trafficking, migrant smuggling, and illicit firearms. The convention applies at sea as well as on land, and it has been strengthened with a new review mechanism. Alongside the Organized Crime Convention, UNODC also supports member states to implement the Global Counterterrorism Instruments, the International Drug Control Conventions, and the Convention Against Corruption. Taken together, these instruments provide a solid basis for international cooperation against transnational and maritime crime and terrorism, and we need to support all member states to make effective use of this framework. To do this, we need greater political will and more resources for technical assistance and capacity building. We need to enact domestic legislation as well as enable cross-border law enforcement and criminal justice cooperation to share intelligence and investigate and prosecute crimes at sea. UNODC works in coordination with UN entities, regional organizations, and other partners to provide assistance to address the full range of maritime crime, including illicit trade, supporting and financing terrorists, the smuggling of migrants at sea and forced labor on board fishing vessels, drug trafficking, piracy, and armed robbery at sea, and other threats. Our support, coupled with sustained political will and donor commitment, is starting to yield results. Not a single suspect had ever been convicted of piracy in the Gulf of Guinea until last month, when both Nigeria and Togo issued their first maritime piracy convictions. Both countries have worked to strengthen criminal justice capacities in very close cooperation with UNODC and other partners, including to draft and revise legislation and build the capacities of prosecutors and judges. Third, we need to keep strengthening international and regional cooperation, as well as public-private partnerships to counter the expansion of maritime crime. UNODC continues to operationalize cooperation through platforms, including the Indian Ocean Forum on Maritime Crime, the Southern Route Partnership, the Caribbean Forum on Maritime Crime, and the Maritime Law Enforcement Dialogues in Southeast Asia. I would also like to note UNODC's work with India through the Information Fusion Center for the Indian Ocean region in New Delhi. UNODC supports the Yaoundé Maritime Safety and Security Architecture, and we are providing experts to the Interregional Coordination Center addressing maritime safety and security in Central and West Africa. Our cooperation is also helping to tackle shared challenges of marine pollution in the Indian Ocean, and UNODC is working with states to develop national resilience frameworks to protect critical maritime infrastructure, such as submarine cables. Public-private partnerships are essential to all these efforts. UNODC works closely with IMO, Interpol, regional organizations, shipping operators, lawyers and insurers, as well as private security